is Cynthia Stoddard, who's a senior philosophy major from Virginia Beach. And she asked this question, which I think is really interesting. She said, do you believe that there is a correlation between how sports companies like Sports Illustrated portray women, particularly in the swimsuit edition, and the rate of sexual assault that occurs by professional and college athletes?
Well, thank you all for being here. And speaking of social media, this is amazing. This is such a great crowd. So I'm going to take a picture of all of you first.
He runs the website.
So everybody smile. Thank you. So thanks for being here, and thanks for having me here. It's an honor to be here before all of you, and such a great turnout. Interesting background on this question before I address what I think is a really important issue. So Cynthia, what was her last name?
Stoddard.
Cynthia Stoddard asked this question. I think it's an excellent question. I found out last night. I didn't know what the question was, but we had a wonderful group for dinner last night. We found out that Cynthia was reluctant and almost scared to ask me this question. Never be scared to ask a question. The questions that you don't ask, you'll never know the answers to. And that could be no, or that could be anything else. So always, I encourage all of you, we're in a wonderful academic learning environment. Ask questions of everybody, your teachers, your parents, your friends, leaders in the community. Please continue to ask, because a lot of times, and this question has come up, but this particular question I haven't heard before. I've heard plenty of questions on the swimsuit issue, and I'll give you my thoughts on the swimsuit issue at large in a second. But questions like this that are thoughtful, that are not only thought-provoking, but they're polarizing, causes me or other people to think. And so as I think about this question, I spent 20 years at Sports Illustrated, and Sports Illustrated and the swimsuit issue come hand in hand. I can't tell you how many people that I've been out to a dinner or a party or anywhere have said, they found out what I want to do, and if they don't want to ask me about their fantasy team, and I don't care about your fantasy team, so don't ask me, do you get to work on the swimsuit issue? I don't care about the swimsuit issue. I couldn't care less. The swimsuit issue and Sports Illustrated go hand in hand, but for someone like me, an editor, I started off as a reporter and a writer, it's almost like a separate universe. So I've never had very much to do with the swimsuit issue. But when you decide to work at a place like Sports Illustrated, or even if you become a subscriber of Sports Illustrated or pick up the magazine, you kind of make this deal with yourself that you have come to accept that the swimsuit issue is part of the equation. Now, to get to the heart of this question, I think as a society today, by and large, we objectify women. And, there's, the phrase that's gone on, and whether it's media or advertising, and sex sells. And that's been this way for a long time, and that's dangerous, because is there a correlation between whether it's the swimsuit issue, and as Jess said, it has bordered on pornography, which makes me uncomfortable. The whole body painting. If you pick up a swimsuit issue nowadays, there's something that's called body painting. And what is body painting? Body painting is an artist painting on a swimsuit. So really, that model is naked. They just have a design painted on them. Do I like that? No. Do I think there's a direct correlation between that and how women are objectified? Yes. Go on to, down to a sexual assault. I think that's taken it to a whole nother level, but it starts with how we view and how we treat women. I think women, certainly in the business world and in academia have have made great strides, to start to get through that glass ceiling that exists. But we have a lot of work to do. And that work starts in society and how we view women. Now, I would venture to guess that the views that all of you, the males I'm talking to have towards women is probably much different than out in the world at large. But I think you all have the unique position where you can become leaders. It starts with, how we treat, our friends, our sisters, our mothers, our daughters. We need to treat them with respect. We need to put them on an equal playing field. I'll tell you one quick story about the swimsuit issue. I've said I've had very little to do with the swimsuit issue over the years, but I have had the opportunity to meet certain people, so models, and I know my job is tough sometimes. So the one model I met, she was 18 at the time. Her name was Petra Nemkova, and Petra was from the Czech Republic, and she was discovered by a model scout from an agency in the Czech Republic, and she was then discovered by Sports Illustrated. And at 18, she made the issue. At 19, she made the cover. And I remember having a very in-depth conversation with Petra, and Petra is somebody who is beautiful on the inside and out. And so, I said, what does this mean to you? How do you like, being half naked in front of the world? And she said, there are certain things I will do and certain things I won't do. I'm very proud. I think my body is beautiful, and I want to use it for good. And she said, being on the cover of Sports Illustrated has changed my life, and I want to use this platform for good. Well, 2 years later, Petra was on vacation with her boyfriend at the time, in the Far East. And if you remember, about 10, 12 years ago, there was a terrible tsunami that killed tons of people. And Petra was in this area, and she was swept out to sea with her boyfriend at the time. She held on to a palm tree for dear life for 14 hours. Her boyfriend was killed. And so it was a terrible time for Petra, but she came back the next year, did the swimsuit issue. She ended up getting out of modeling, and she used this platform for, great good. And I think if used the right way, if more people used it the way Petra Nemkova did, we'd be a lot better off. But we have a long way to go. But I think the swimsuit issue and women that are half naked, and it's not just a swimsuit issue, it's the Victoria's Secret catalog and the shows and all that. I think we've made great strides in certain areas, and we have a long way to go. So thank you for that question. I think it was an excellent question.
Rick, just not necessarily the same theme, but something similar. I know for years you've had your hands on an issue involving the National Football League and violence against women. A book you published 20 years ago was kind of groundbreaking on that. And just in the last couple of years, because of a very high-profile incident involving Ray Rice and his girlfriend in an elevator, the NFL has changed its policy towards players who are involved in domestic violence. They ran ads in all the stadiums. They had high-profile players like Eli Manning of the New York Giants come and speak out openly about how players have to stand up to this issue. And just in the last 2 weeks, the Giants themselves have come back into the spotlight because they have a player, a kicker, who was brutally abusing his wife and has admitted this in public documents that have come out, and the league suspended him for 1 game. And it's put the league back out in negative light again on this issue of leadership by men when it involves violence against women. Question to you is this. Do you think sports leagues like the NFL, are they really equipped to set a standard for the rest of us, to show an example on how to be leaders when it comes to opposing violence against women? I don't think you're on. Hand him your mic, BJ.
That better?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all for having me down here. This is quite a treat for myself and for BJ, and of course, Jeff and I go way back. And the issue the question you raised, it's multi-layered. You should all know that 20 years ago, I first met Jeff when he was an aspiring book author, and he came to me with an idea which I thought was so unique and so different and so, quite frankly, devastating that I immediately said, I want to publish this book. And the book was called Pros and Cons, the criminals, the felons who play in the National Football League. Now, this is in the mid-'90s. Up until that time, nobody had ever looked at the NFL. They knew these were guys who were, a lot of them were bad guys. And they had gotten away with a lot of terrible things, terrible sins, through their entire collegiate and into their professional career. But until Jeff came along, nobody had really sort of documented just how terrible these crimes were. And what Jeff did, which was so amazing, in doing his research, he went back through all the various police records in all 50 states to find out names of players from the National Football League at that time to see if they had been arrested, they had been indicted, and in some cases convicted. And these were terrible, terrible crimes. Many of them were against women. Now, when this book came out, it caused a firestorm because the NFL, they're in the business of selling professional football and getting a lot of TV ratings and endorsements and all sorts of things. And this was the last thing they wanted to have seen, is a major book coming out about detailing all their heroes on Sunday afternoon being involved with sexual assaults, domestic violence. And I remember, as Jeff wrote the book and going through chapter by chapter, it would just, you had to stop because the accounts, which were from your reporting and from the police records, were so awful that you said, I can't believe these things were going on. And in many cases, while these guys were being indicted and going through the court system, they were still allowed to play for the Miami Dolphins or for the Minnesota Vikings or whatever team they were playing for because they hadn't been convicted yet. And the teams, the owners, well, in this country, that's how it works. Until you're convicted, you're allowed to pursue your life. But the evidence was overwhelming that these were guys who were just really were a threat to society. So I use that background, and it's the Ray Rice situation, because the NFL eventually sort of got over the fact that that pros and cons went away. Problem still existed, and every so often it bubbles up. Most notable, of course, was the Ray Rice situation. And here, Ray Rice, who by all accounts is a wonderful guy and is a straight shooter, then you see a video of him literally punching his wife in the face and knocking her out and dragging her body out of an elevator. That's real hard to come up with a reason or rationale as to why he did that. Well, he was inebriated or whatever the problem might have been, but the fact of the matter is everybody could see the videotape, and that was damning. It was Exhibit A. NFL finally said, okay, we have to come up with a policy. Roger Goodell, who is the commissioner, makes something like $30 or $40 million a year as the NFL commissioner. He bungled the whole Ray Rice case, in my opinion. Finally got rid of Rice out of the league. Rice has not been able to come back to the league. Nobody will hire him. And now...
And you think that's the right thing?
Yeah,
You don't think he should be hired back now?
He's now in his 30s. He's theoretically at the end of his playing career, and he's done a lot of penance. But why would you want to bring a guy back in? You say, well, people deserve second chances. But this was a violent attack.
Right.
I mean,
Well, you think he shouldn't be allowed to play for the rest of his life?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, and again, a personal opinion, our society's become so forgiving.
Yeah.
But there's some crimes you just don't get a second chance on. And maybe that's my own personal feelings about this. But
this is one of them.
This is one of them. And now with the punter, the kicker for the New York Giants, I mean, he's been forthcoming. Yes, I was involved with domestic violence with my ex-wife. And again, the Giants, the wonderful family, the Mara family, took forever to say, well, I don't know. I mean, no, why? Just goodbye. And I think, particularly with the NFL, until they take a much harder stance about this and really come to terms with this, they're going to have more and more of these kind of things crop up, and it's always going to be, no pun intended, a black eye for the league.
All right. One more question in the area of sports, and actually these really aren't sports questions, but they stem from sports. The other day I was driving through my hometown in Connecticut, which is a big football town, and high school football, pee-wee football is really big in our town. And I was driving through town. It's fall. The leaves are coming down. There's pumpkins everywhere, and I pulled up to a traffic light, and there was a sign. And I'm used to seeing these signs every fall. They come out at the end of the summer and into early fall, and they're encouraging young boys to sign up for football, for pee-wee football. What struck me about the sign I saw, this actually was a couple weeks ago, was I was at a red light, and I looked at the sign, and I was like, am I reading that right? It was signing up for flag football. And I asked around a couple of guys in town, and we don't have tackle football anymore until you get to high school. I was like, seriously? Flag football only? And here's the interesting thing. The preface to the question is, this year the ratings, the television ratings for professional football are the lowest they've ever been. They've dropped 11% the first 7 weeks of the season. And everyone's trying to figure out why. The number of kids playing pee-wee football is plummeting. And so I can't help but wonder how much of this is related to concussions and the massive amount of attention that's been paid in the last 2 years to brain damage that's caused by repeated hits to the head. So my question to you is a really simple one, BJ. You got 2 sons. You've edited football for Sports Illustrated for almost 20 years. Would you let your sons play tackle football?
No. A simple answer. No.
Okay.
And I love football, and I love watching football. And let me address the NFL thing. I don't think the NFL, there's so much hype, there's so much gambling, whether it's fantasy football or it's actual gambling in the NFL, and really the rise of the NFL, is directly tied to gambling. I mean, it is. I mean, that just is. But I think the reason why the NFL ratings are so bad this year, in my view, is the product stinks. The games aren't competitive. We had a Monday night game that was a 6-6 tie 2 weeks. I mean, that's like watching paint dry. But you watch college football, and last week Penn State beat Ohio State, the number 2 team in the country, 107,000 people there, screaming, their lungs off, and it's a great atmosphere. It's a terrific atmosphere. You go to Knoxville, Tennessee, 110,000 people. Tuscaloosa, Alabama, 105,000 people. Columbus, Ohio, 108,000 people.
It's exciting. It's a big deal on this camp. We're only going to get 800 students, and it's a big deal.
Yeah. So the college football has never been bigger. And I've been a champion of college sports, for the last 20 years. I love college sports. There's that passion and some of that innocence that is not in the NFL, even though big-time college sports is a business. That said, my younger son, I have 2 boys, 7 and 8 years old. My 8-year-old, he's gonna cure cancer. He's so smart, and I'm gonna encourage him to do that. He's also a terrific singer. I just signed him up for singing lessons and whatever, so I don't have to worry about him. My younger son, his name is Bradley, and sweetest little boy, terrific athlete. I saw from the time, and Rick, has done some unbelievable work on parenting and the whole issue, of, a lot of times in sports, it's not the kids, it's not the media that's the problem, it's the parents. and I coach now, and some of these parents are brutal, and I tell them from the start that you're gonna be encouraging. You're not gonna put too much pressure on these young kids, or you're gonna be off my team. So I saw, I say that as a caveat. I saw when little Bradley was 6 months old, I saw the way he moved. I saw the way he was built, and I knew he was going to be an athlete. I've been around athletes all my life. And Bradley, he's got a terrific arm. He's got a great spirit about him. He's a really good baseball player. He's a really good basketball player. And just a couple weeks ago, he said, "Dad, I think I might want to play football." And they do have flag football in my town, but they do graduate to pads. And I looked at him and I said, "No way." And why? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, it's these guys are hitting way too young. Way too young. They don't have any control over their bodies, and they do not know how to hit. Secondly, the technology. Helmet companies could make helmets that are a lot safer, but they don't. I'm not exactly sure why, but they can make enough money doing what they do now, and they can make cheaper helmets and sell them to a much broader audience rather than charging $200 or $250 for a helmet that's going to keep a kid safer. And so right now, football, you look at some of the equipment that's passed down from Pee Wee League to Pee Wee League. It's old. It's not up to standard. So
it's interesting because, what you just said about the technique and the hitting and the coaching. I was watching Bo Jackson was on ESPN a week and a half ago, and he was asked the question that I asked you, and he said he wouldn't let his sons play football either. And one of the reasons he cited was that too many youth coaches really don't know how to coach kids on the right techniques for hitting, and so you have the bigger kids hurting the smaller kids. And I personally, I think that one of the reasons, I think the ratings are affected by other things, but I think what scares the NFL is fewer and fewer parents, particularly in the suburbs, are letting their kids sign up to play football, and that's a problem. When you get to the point where there are only a few pockets in the country where they're playing that game, because kids are learning to play soccer or lacrosse or other sports, I think it's an issue. But I want to move to something else.
You want me to chime in here?
Coach Wolff, you need the mic. Either you're technologically challenged, which I think you are, or...
Is that working?
Yes.
Yeah, speaking of technology, I'm very comfortable living in the 20th century.
He needs me. He just doesn't know it.
He
Exactly.
needs me, too. I had to check him in this morning.
That's right.
Online flights.
The whole issue of concussions and letting kids play football. My older daughter's getting married in a couple of months, and I heard her talking to her fiancé, and they were talking about sports, and she said, "Oh, I'd never let my kids play football." And I got to tell you, I'm of two minds of this. I do believe that flag football is a much better alternative. If you listen to the experts in the field, like a Dr. Robert Cantu, who was the premier neurosurgeon, he says kids should not play tackle football till they're released in high school. Two reasons. One is that their neck muscles aren't developed enough until they're 14 or 15. And as you guys have mentioned, the lack of instruction at the Pee Wee level, the Pop Warner level, is just not there. Because there is a certain way to tackle properly without hurting your neck or concussions in the head. But I want to throw this into the mix because it becomes sort of like a knee-jerk reaction. Oh, tackle football is so dangerous. My kids all played a variety of sports, as I did. I don't know if you've been to a high school or a college soccer match recently, but the amount of pounding that goes on with soccer is scary. And whether it's heading a ball, banging into somebody in front of the net, guys are falling down, girls as well, of course. Be careful with soccer. Be careful with ice hockey. Ice hockey is, of course, even more of a danger with concussions. Baseball. And the point is, you can pretty much find any sport today that kids enjoy playing where concussion's a real concern. Obviously, the problem with football in particular is that there are no helmets available in the market today that prevent concussions. I mean, people are trying to find it, but it's like trying to find a holy grail. There's nothing you can do to prevent concussions. That's just the way it goes. It's an assumption of the risk. So I don't know what's going to happen. NFL clearly is aware of this. They're doing the best they can, but after all, they've been hiding it for 20 years with the cover-up. But I don't know what's going to happen, but I do think that at some point in this country, if you're going to go on to play college football or pro football, you're going to have to basically sign a waiver that says you understand you can end up with serious concussions and you can't sue us. It's a mess, and I don't think there is a clear-cut answer at this point.
Let's switch gears. This is a business and politics question. I'm not going to ask you, who you're supporting or anything like that, but I want to ask you a question about Donald Trump for the simple reason that you have a unique perspective here that I think people will be interested in. Number one, you've published Jack Welch's autobiography, considered one of the greatest business minds, built GE. You've published Ted Turner's autobiography, guy who created CNN and TNT and the Atlanta Braves. You've published Hank Paulson's memoir, the former Secretary of the Treasury. The bottom line here is you've done, in the last 20 years, you've done a whole list of the top business people in the country, and you've also done a book on Donald Trump. So my question is this. How would you compare him to the other business leaders you've published just as a businessman?
Well, that's a loaded question because Jeff knows that I published a book entitled Trump Nation about 10 years ago. It was written by Tim O'Brien, who at that time was the New York Times leading investigative business writer. And O'Brien had covered Trump for a number of years, and he said, Rick, this guy is a phony. He's a fraud. He's a big P.T. Barnum. And he talks a good game, and he says he's worth billions of dollars, but in fact he's not. He does not have a Midas touch. Many of his buildings and ventures go bankrupt. He's the only guy in history who had a casino in Atlantic City, which went bankrupt. He owned the Plaza Hotel in New York City. That went bankrupt. I mean, he likes to talk a good game. In any event, we published a book, and Trump took great exception with one chapter which basically detailed his actual net worth. And according to the book, and the reporter, the writer, had talked to 3 individual sources who worked in the accounting department for Trump's companies, and they all said that he's worth about $250 million. Now, that's a lot of money, but it's also the same amount of money he'd inherited from his father, who also was a real estate developer and had passed on several years before. Trump, of course, in those days said he was worth $4 billion or $5 billion. So Trump filed a lawsuit against the publisher, me, Tim O'Brien. Time Warner was the publisher, for $5 billion, saying he had been defamed. And, so we went to court, and every court he went to, he lost. He was deposed, and at one point, our lawyers were asking Mr. Trump, well, how do you figure out how do you put $5 billion as your net worth? And he said, well, because when I license my name on other buildings, it's worth a lot of money. And our lawyers said, well, how do you figure out how much you're worth? And this is all on tape. Trump said, well, it depends on what day. What do you mean, what day? Well, some days I wake up, I feel like I'm worth a lot of money. Some days, not so much. This is all true. So Trump lost the lawsuit. It cost Time Warner a lot of money to defend it. But as a businessman, I'd be very suspect as to what's going on. So, and again, I don't want to get involved in politics.
Right.
I think there are a lot of concerns about Hillary Clinton as well. So, anyhow.
Yeah. We have this question from Hannah Larson, another one of our students. This is a question that I actually hear a lot. And I think Mormon students ask this more. That's my sense. I mean, I've lectured to journalism students on campuses all over the country, and I hear this more from students at Brigham Young University in Provo, BYU, Idaho, and here. And it's this. It's I think Hannah's get her finger on something interesting. She says, "How have you managed your family and personal life with your career?" It's a balance question, which I get asked that a ton because my students know I'm never home, and you guys are like that too. I mean, I know we've worked together for 20 years, and I know how much you work, and I know you work 7 days a week. I get emails from you guys on Sunday morning and midnight on Monday. It's like craziness. Rick, let me start with you. How have you balanced, because I also know, and these guys wouldn't know, I know what kind of dad you are, and I know what kind of husband you are. So I know there's no balance issue there, but how do you do that?
I wish I had an easy answer. I think it has to do with setting your priorities in life. And you obviously, everybody has their own vision and idea of priorities. And obviously for me, my family comes first. That's always a given. Then you worry about, obviously, paying the bills, making sure that you do a good job with your colleagues in your career. But, there are days where you say, I don't want to do that, or how am I going to make this happen? Somehow you just put your blinders on and get it done. Simple as that, because people are counting on you to do the right thing.
Do you believe in balance?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I don't go to the gym to work out, for a couple hours, I mean, it doesn't do my family any good if I'm not around because I have a heart attack. So you got to have that balance.
BJ, you want to take a whack at that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I have a little bit of different perspective. I don't believe in balance because
I don't either.
There's no such thing as balance. It's the scales are going to be tipped one way or another. But I come to everything I do. I want to be the best at what I do, and I feel I can. I want to be, I've gotten to Sports Illustrated, and it's, a competitive industry. And not only did I want to get there, I wanted to excel. I wanted to be the best, and I was driven to do that. So from a family perspective, it's, I have the same sort of attitude, and it has to do with a lot what Rick said, and that's priorities. My dad wasn't around. I to this day, I don't have a great relationship with my dad because he doesn't know who I am. Because he wasn't around to watch me, and he was very successful in business, but now he's competitive. He was always competitive with me, and no, you're not on my level, whatever. So when I had children, and I said, you know what, I am going to be the best possible father that I can be, and I have 2 young boys, and from day one, I've been their hero. And it's going to stay that way. And I promise myself that, and I promise that to them. Because they don't care where I work. They don't care what I do. They don't care if I'm on TV. They don't care, if I'm, editing, a cover story that's being mentioned in every media outlet in the country. They don't care. And they shouldn't care. They care if I am there. And especially when they're little, you can never get that time back. So I made sure just about every night that I could. And, if I had to get up at 5 or 6 in the morning to get to the office early so I could get home and I could have dinner with them, I could bathe them, I could put them to bed. That was important to me, and that was just as important to me as excelling in work, in my work life, my professional life. So to me, they don't compete with each other, and sometimes I'm going to have to travel or I can't be there. Sometimes, if one of my sons has, something at school or a doctor's appointment, that's going to take a higher priority than anything else. But knowing that, your family, is got to come first. You can lose your job, you can lose your career, but your family should always be there if you make the commitment. So I decided from day one, I am going to make that commitment, that same type of commitment that I would do for everything. So if I can keep that level of commitment and dedication in all aspects of my life, it's going to be a lot easier.
The reason I agreed with you when I said I don't believe in balance either is just that, actually I don't think there's a disagreement here, but it's more, when you think of balance, most people think of balance is equal. And my life is constantly out of balance if I'm comparing the time that I can spend on my profession versus the time I spend with my children or the time I spend with my wife. It's sometimes grossly out of balance. But I think the misinterpretation you can get from that is that, well, then that means you're being derelict as a husband or a father, and I don't believe that for a minute. Like, I think that there are plenty of folks who are out of balance and they are derelict in their family obligations, but I think there are plenty of ways that men and women, it's to me it's even harder if you're a woman who works the way you guys work or I work, and there are plenty of women who do that, and it's an even trickier dance for them. But I know plenty of people who are, I would say, some of the best parents I know, and they work ridiculous amounts of hours. And so that's why I was asking the question. One of our students, who I really like a lot, she's a freshman, and you both met her yesterday. Her name is Olivia Ekberg, and she's a former Olympian, and just has an interesting story in her own right. But one of the questions that she had a couple of interesting questions, but the one I want to zero in on, and I want to tie it to something that I'm going to ask you, which is, she said, is there an underlying moral standard or approach to the stories that you select to publish? And I actually want to couple that to something that I wanted to ask you about, and I'm only doing this in the interest of time because we're running out, is you've now done with me, you've done Steve Young's autobiography, which was a 5-year project, and you've gotten to know a lot about Mormonism by doing Steve's life. You did The Mormon Way of Doing Business with me, which was your idea, to spend a whole book on 8 Mormon CEOs, and you've known me for 20 years. And so, I mean, I've taken you to a Mormon temple in New York City. You may know more about the Mormons than we do. So what I want to ask you is, what are your impressions about Mormonism? Curious.
I don't know. I think that's a question. I mean, I'm not Mormon. I think, like most book editors, I tend to be curious about things. I knew very little about the Latter-day Saints growing up. I grew up in suburban, outside New York City, suburbs there. And I've always been fascinated by Mormons, and particularly I was drawn to them, which is why we talked about the Mormon way of doing business, because when we were talking, you said, well, these guys are unbelievably successful, but they work 9 to 5, and they go home to their families, and they keep things, their priorities in order, and then they spend their weekends with their family and don't do any work on Sundays. And I was like, but for most of America, if you want to get ahead in life in terms of your career, you're going to put in 60, 70, 80 hours a week, and then you hope that your spouse takes care of the family and so on and so forth, and things get all out of whack. But that's the price you have to pay if you want to succeed. So I'm looking at all this, talking to you, and I'm thinking, this is a pretty amazing set of priorities that the Mormons seem to go through and embrace, and it works. So I think I was just curious.
Yeah. The family part.
Well,
Yeah.
the business, I mean,
Yeah.
it's an extraordinary kind of religion that, it's hard to find any downside to this. I mean, it's pretty impressive.
And BJ and I, we actually had this conversation last night before going to bed. We were talking about this. I was reminding him that about 5 years ago, I introduced him to one of the apostles in our church. We were out in Salt Lake. He and I and two of our other colleagues had gone out there to do some workshops for the writers and editors and television people at Deseret News and KSL Radio and TV. And while we were there, we were asked if we would go and meet with one of the apostles who at the time was in charge of the church's public affairs department. And so we went over there, and it's not often that anybody gets to sit down and have a meeting with an apostle, and BJ's not a Mormon either, and so he was asking me, like, you know, what are we doing? And I was explaining, this is kind of like going to the Vatican, you know, if you're a Mormon, you get to talk to the Pope, and so it's kind of a big deal. And so we went over there, but when we got there, and this is the question I'm going to ask him, I told him last night I was going to ask him this, is when we got there, Elder Cook asked a really heady question. He looked at all three of my friends. One was from 60 Minutes, one was from 2020, and BJ from Sports Illustrated. And he said, if you were us, what would you do different?
All right, now I'm on the spot. So, you know, just a quick background. So when we were out there, you know, we did our workshop, and, you know, it was at the Deseret News and Deseret Media Company, and Clark Gilbert, who's now the president of BYU Idaho, was the CEO at the time, and you know, we were sitting in his office, and we're done, and he said, I have a surprise for you, and he said, we're going to meet, you know, one of the apostles. And I look at Jeff, and I am intellectually curious, and Jeff and I have all these conversations, you know, about the church, you know, about what it's like to be a Mormon and everything. And so at that point, I didn't even know what an apostle was. And, you know, all you guys are probably like, oh, my God. And so we're walking out, and Clark, you know, sees me, and I'm like, oh, this is cool. And he's looking at me, cool. And he pulls me aside, and he's like, hey, this is a really big deal. So we walk over to the church, and Elder Cook couldn't be more gracious. He couldn't be more humble. And automatically, like, that's my kind of person. And, you know, I think we've all, you know, the three of us have interviewed so many successful people, and I think the best people are, you know, the people that are just normal people and that are well-grounded. And, you know, I think Jack Welch is probably one of those people. Donald Trump is not. You know, and I think that says a lot. So we get into Elder Cook's office, and we're having some great conversation. And then, you know, he looks at me, and he looks at Armin Katayan. And Armin is a legend in the business. I mean, you talk about, as a reporter, one of the single best reporters I have ever seen. I mean, he can report anything, sports, business, politics, you know, corruption, no matter what. And he and I kind of looked at each other when we were asked this question. So how did I answer, you know, this question, and I've been able to think about it, is, you know, I think, you know, what you guys have, and I think today is a perfect example of this. You know, you practically have the whole school here, you know, on a Friday morning, which is remarkable. You have a tremendous appreciation for not only family, but community. And, you know, in addition to, you know, all the other things, you know, the church, you know, has to offer with, you know, morality and service. But as somebody that didn't grow up Mormon, like, I don't know half of it. I mean, I happen to know more than a lot of people because of my close friendship with Jeff and my own intellectual curiosity. But I think that message needs to get out. Too many times we hear about the controversy, the negativity when, you know, there's an issue, whether it's, you know, homosexuality or premarital sex, or a lot of the things that not only it's not just Mormonism, it's, you know, Catholicism and a lot of other religions, you know, are kind of thrown into the fire this way. But I remember as a kid growing up, and some of the people that are a little older might remember, the LDS Church had commercials on Saturday mornings, and I'd see them when I'm watching my cartoons, and it was like a little skit where somebody did something wrong.
It's about time.
Yeah, there you go. And there was a whole song where they would sing at the end, "I told the truth," and I remember that. And I didn't really understand what they were about in terms of the religious part about it, but that stuck with me. So I'm not saying do kind of a corny commercial, but I think the message I think the message needs to come out. And we talk about this in PR and crisis management and so forth. Always better to get ahead of things.
Right.
So if you can stay ahead of it, and especially if you can do it in a positive way and not be on your heels being like, oh my goodness, we have this controversy, how are we going to react to it? Because then you end up going like this. You're defending yourself, and people can see that. So, I think, and what I said to, Elder Cook, and I would say the same thing now, even more so, get that message out, let people know all of the great things that you're doing and all the great things that you have to offer. Not that you're trying to convert people, not that you're trying to beat your chest, but I think that message needs to get out.
Yeah. Great. I wish we had more time, but we're out of time. So I want to thank you both for coming, and we could go on here, but we're out of time. I want to say, though, in front of all the students, that, how grateful I am for the impact both of you have had on my, not only on my career, but on my life. It's a lot of people don't understand the relationship between writers and editors. It's an interesting one, and the writer who is willing to allow an editor to manipulate and adjust and really sometimes improve your writing and your presentation, that's the mark of a good editor, but it's also the mark of a good writer. I learned that early, and I've certainly had that experience with both of you, and it's been wonderful working with both of you, both through the magazine and through the books. Some of my best out-of-work experiences with colleagues have been with you two guys, and so appreciate you coming to Southern Virginia and being part of our institute, and thanks to you who presented the questions and were here tonight. Thank you.